To discuss trade tensions and the global impact, we're joined now by former U.S. Trade Representative Carla Hills and Perella Weinberg advisory partner Walter Isaacson. Ladies and gentlemen, good to have you here.
Pleasure to join you.
Ambassador Hills, let me start with you. I don't know if you've seen these reports out of Handelsblatt in Germany where they say that the U.S. has said to Germany, hey, you get rid of your tariffs, we'll get rid of ours, and it's under consideration. And then Angela Merkel comes out and says, well, if we're going to do that, it has to be the reduction for every single country in the world. I mean, if that were to come true, you'd actually have lower tariffs, not higher. Do you see any good news in that? Maybe some willingness to give the president some credit for the method?
It hasn't happened yet, but Merkel is right. We have a rule of non-discrimination in the World Trade Organization, and if we had a trade agreement with Europe, I think it would be very positive for the United States.
I guess I'm trying to get at, when you see this possibility, does it suggest to you that perhaps the methodology might just work?
I think that in trade negotiations, it's a good idea to have an overall strategy and then sit down with your trading partners and find a win-win situation. That's where we've made the greatest forward movement. I think threats and pounding the table are not a good idea, but let's see what happens. You can't just have a one-off where you reduce the tariffs that you don't for all unless you go into a free trade agreement, as we have done, like with Mexico and Canada.
I hear you say that threats and pounding the table doesn't work, but a lot of folks might be listening and saying, well, we've tried the other way for 30 years. You were involved in that process, and people are dissatisfied with the results at this point, that there are still 10% tariffs on cars going into the European Union, and that China has actually increased the role of the state into trade rather than reducing it, as was expected when they joined the WTO.
Well, I disagree with how you frame the issue. Let me just say that I agree that we have problems with China. They have not followed the non-discrimination and national treatment with respect to a number of issues, including intellectual property and having percentage limitations on investments, and I could go on and on. But the best way to get those removed is to use the trade rules. That has kept us in fair stability for 70 years, and it's added more than $2 trillion to our GDP. So let's not tear it up, let's build on it. And there's no question in the last 25 years that there have been enormous changes in our economy in terms of automation. We're doing a lot more with fewer workers, and we need to focus on those issues.
Walter, what's your take on the tactics, how likely we are to end in a positive way? And if we did get a deal, albeit just on autos with the EU, how big a win that would be for the president in the short term?
I do think that you've asked the right question. You know, there is with Donald Trump a lot of bluster, a lot of pounding the table, and perhaps that can move the needle and suddenly we have a breakthrough. It hasn't worked in some cases. He did it, say, on Mexico will build a wall, Mexico will pay for the wall, a lot of pounding the table, and that didn't work. On the other hand, if you end up with lower tariffs on cars, European Union, worldwide, or I'm almost brought back to Ronald Reagan, who did a lot of strong talk about nuclear weapons, but then also said he'd be willing to go to a world of zero nuclear weapons. The question is that really going to happen? And I guess one data point I would have is that deep in Donald Trump's, history, he's always been against sort of the free trade. He's always been a little bit more in favor of protectionism and tariffs. I think this is what he believes. So to answer your question directly, if I had to guess, we're less likely to get to a world of zero tariffs through a lot of this bluster. But if it happens, more credit to him.
Walter, I'm wondering your take on perhaps the unintended consequence, at least unintended for some, of a weakened WTO out of all of this. I mean, we don't know how this is all going to end up, but there are certain conditions that have been set, or maybe precedents set, at least in tone in global trade by all of this. What do you think changes going forward based on what we've seen already?
I think that's a great question, John, because I heard Jay LaPierre, who was on the last hour, who's a great business leader here in New Orleans, just saying the uncertainty about the world trade rules in the future has caused companies to pause in new investments. You know, he runs a company called Latrim and Interlocks that makes conveyor belts and equipment and food moving equipment. And he's got to figure out, what aluminum can I get? What steel can I get? Can I export to China my conveyor belts? So the WTO gave a foundation where a business person trying to figure out how am I going to invest over the next 5 years would say, okay, I know the rules of the road. If you throw all that out, I think you're getting some uncertainty. You've seen aluminum exports right behind me in the port of New Orleans go down by half in the past year, you know, drop 50%. Soybeans down 20%. So those type of things aren't good when you say, hey, we may throw out all the rules of the road.
Of course you know, Mr. LaPierre, you're a fellow Louisian. You're sitting there in front of Tulane.
Oh, hey, he went down. We
We
started at high school together. So I think Jay LaPierre is one of the great business leaders of this country, and he's a major exporter and importer. And of course, I'm sitting here at the foot of the Mississippi River.
It was terrific. Thank you, Ambassador Hills and Walter Isaacson. Good to have you on.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.